Is the CRF125F a good bike for beginners, or should you just skip it and go up to 150R, 230, or a 250F motocross bike? Well, if you care about your confidence and your safety, then I highly recommend starting on a bike like this if you're under 5'6". Why is that? Well, because the power curve on a bigger trail bike or a motocross or enduro bike is a lot less predictable. So when you have more power and you're just learning to ride, it's harder to tame the power if you're not used to snappy or jerky throttle. So when you have more power, you're a lot more likely to give it gas and get flown off the bike. And when you get thrown back on the bike, you tense up and you're more likely to continue giving it more throttle and whiskey throttle, and the bike will fly out from under you. Or if you do keep hanging on, you're more likely to run into a tree or fly off the course. And in addition to that, it's harder to learn how to use the clutch on a bike with a lot of power, generally because they have their power geared towards high RPM. So for a motocross or enduro bike, they don't have as much low-end torque right off of idle. So what I mean is when you just get going in first gear and you start moving, they don't have a lot of power and they have a really light flywheel. So they rev up really quick, but they also rev back down really quick. So you got to get moving. You got to give it more gas, and you got to get up to a little bit higher speed so that the engine doesn't stall. Where on a smaller trail bike like this, it has more low-end torque right above idle, and the heavier flywheel keeps the engine going and chugging better at a lower RPM. So you can let out the clutch sooner and at a lower RPM. So when you can let it out sooner, this builds your confidence because you're not worrying about stalling it as often. Then moving on to the suspension, when you start on a bike that is made to go faster, for example, the CRF125F, even though it's only a 250, it has a lot stiffer suspension because it's made to ride faster. And when you're riding it slower, if you're a beginner, that stiff suspension is not going to compress as much, and it's going to feel harsh. You're going to feel every little bump jarring into your arms and your feet, and it's going to get you exhausted more quickly. So when you're riding a trail bike that actually fits you and it has nice, soft, plush suspension, it will absorb those bumps more easily so that you won't get exhausted. So instead of feeling all the bumps and shock of the bumps into your arms and hands, the forks and shock are going to compress those bumps, or they're going to absorb those bumps, so you'll be floating over them rather than rocking back and forth over them as if you didn't have much, if any, suspension on a enduro or motocross bike. And then last but not least, the maintenance on a trail bike is generally less than a motocross or enduro bike. So the air filters, they're more protected, so dirt and water and mud are less likely to get in there. Obviously, you can't get as much power potential, but on these bikes, power, it doesn't really matter. So you won't have to clean the air filter quite as often as a motocross bike because they suck in a lot more air and dirt. And then the oil, you can go a little bit longer on oil changes, and they're really easy to do. And that's pretty much all you need to do as far as keeping the engine going for a long time. You don't really have to worry about checking valves on these bikes because as long as you keep the oil change, they're going to last pretty much forever. Oh, and I also forgot to mention the price. You can start out on one of these brand new for around $4,000, where an enduro bike, they're $8,000 to $10,000. So half the price, and if you're buying used, it's even less than that. And they hold the resale value even more than a motocross bike. Why? Because they're in higher demand. More people find them more usable, so they either keep them for their kids or grandkids to ride. So if you're worried about outgrowing a little trail bike in just a year, don't worry. You can probably buy it and sell it next year for the same price or slightly less, where if you buy a motocross bike, you might lose $500 to $1,000 in 1 year. So if you're ready to ride, but you don't want to get hurt, which I don't want you to do. I want you to enjoy riding with your family. I want you to check out my video here on how to safely ride a dirt bike for the first time. I'm Kelly Fager from Motocross Hideout. Learn more, ride more.